view. So if there are any questions from the audience, I would be assisting you in taking them. So over to you, Geeta. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, as you say, this is the last plenary session or panel discussion before, of course, the closing session. And I'm very aware of the time because I was instructed that indeed the closing session has to start at 5 o'clock your time. So as the moderator of this panel on harnessing trade and investment for responsible business and sustainable development, I also have a very important task of moderating, of course, our distinguished panel. A number of the panelists are joining as well virtually, and I also welcome, of course, the two panelists who are with you in the room in Dhaka. The session today, as I said, is a very important one on harnessing trade and investment for responsible business and sustainable development. We have a distinguished panel of speakers from a range of organizations who will share their experiences on how to advance the business and human rights agenda within the trade and investment agenda, and how to address continued challenges in this regard, how to support businesses in upholding international standards in their investment decisions and global supply chain operations, and also help us think about how synergies could be fostered to further accelerate progress towards full respect of human rights. And before turning to our distinguished panelists, I would like to briefly set the stage for our discussion, because finding the right way to upholding human and labor rights in today's globalized economy has been a goal and a challenge for many decades. And ILO standards, especially the 1998 Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, as well as the Tripartite Declaration of Principles Concerning Multinational Enterprises and Social Policy, the M&E Declaration, are commonly cited in bilateral trade and investment agreements, alongside the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and in some cases, the OECD M&E guidelines. They're also referenced in government CSR policies, corporate codes, supplier codes, private compliance initiatives, due diligence policies, etc. The ILO has just launched a labor provisions in trade agreements hub that actually allows users to navigate and analyze these labor provisions in trade agreements using an interactive map. So you can actually see in which way labor standards are included in such trade agreements. The ILO has also established a cooperation with the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, and I'm very pleased that Invest India also was able to participate in our session today. And that cooperation is intended to build capacity of investment promotion agencies to attract foreign direct investment that contributes to achieving national development and decent work priorities as outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2021, the International Labour Conference of the ILO adopted a global call for a human-centered recovery to the COVID-19 crisis that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And among the priority areas, again, features the need to foster more resilient supply chains that contribute to decent work, adopted at the international, sustainability of enterprises along the supply chains, including micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, environmental sustainability, protection of and respect for human rights in line with the 3 pillars of the guiding principles and the ILO M&E Declaration, supported by sustainable international trade and investment. And also the Working Group on Business and Human Rights has issued a report in July 2021 on human rights compatible international investment agreements, recommending that states ensure that all existing and future investment agreements are compatible with their international human rights obligations. States should also invoke international investment agreements to encourage responsible business conduct on the part of investors and hold them accountable for abusing internationally recognized human rights. So despite the recognition that trade and investment and that they hold many opportunities for inclusive economic growth and the advancement of human rights, the overall picture is, of course, more complex, and inequality has been growing both within and among countries, with many vulnerable groups still in exploitative practices. So with this brief introduction, I would now like to turn to our expert panel and the first panelist, which is Professor Shaukat Alam, who is Professor of International and Environmental Law at Macquarie Law University in Australia. So Professor Alam, you've been conducting extensive research on the challenging balance between the protection of human rights and the environment at the one hand and investment protection on the other. And your new book, Investment Protection, Human Rights and Biodiversity Conservation in Search of a Balance to Achieve Sustainable Development, is precisely on this topic. So can you share with us the key takeaways of your research and why it is so difficult to find the right balance? Over to you, Professor Alam.
Thank you so much, Geeta. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to reflect on my research on these competing areas of trade, investment, sustainable development. If I could reflect on the global trend, as you know, that the countries traditionally they pursue trade and investment for economic development, creation of employment opportunities, and through that process they ensure good standard of living and quality of human rights. And so internationally, we see those standards, the human rights standards, norms, and environmental protections, and the traditional development paradigm, the trade and investments, they actually run parallel globally. And they have different sort of institutional and regulatory frameworks, different sort of policy objectives. They're now, I think, interacting with each other in such a complex manner that shows some sort of potential implications for human rights violations, as well as impact on environmental protection. Now, because we live in a globalized world, states are more interdependent than independent. So one sector's or actor's behavior and operation will have profound effect on other actors and the society in general. So in relation to investment and trade, as you know, that internationally it has been recognized that the trade investment, they don't operate in vacuum. They operate in a social context. We must make sure that trade investment and other social issues are mutually supportive and reinforcing. Actually, that mutual supportiveness is what we call sustainable development. The sustainable development is a development that integrates that environmental issues, economic issues, and social issues in a nice, balanced way. So it is nice to say this one, and there are reports and literatures. I'll not go into that internationally. That is all proven that there is no compromise, and we must integrate these sort of competing norms and values and priorities. However, these three dimensions, as if I could say that this environment, human rights, as well as development, they actually create different sort of policy challenges in order to make them mutually supportive and integrated. For majority of the countries, particularly developing countries, their priority is primarily the development and economic growth. And it's easy to say that, okay, we must ensure human rights, we must ensure environmental protection, but how we can do that? It's a challenging issue for them because many countries are not in a position to actually allocate resources or to even change their domestic or international regulatory frameworks to integrate their human rights and environmental considerations. There are over 3,000 bilateral investment treaties. While we have seen internationally major investment treaties and WTO, they have actually provided recognition of these human rights and also environmental considerations in their regulatory framework and agreements. Unfortunately, those bilateral investment treaties are not facilitating that sort of environmental standards and human rights standards in their practices. That's why largely of those bilateral treaties, if they are not under any sort of regulatory framework, they will have profound impact on human rights protections and environmental safeguards. As I mentioned earlier, that development, investment, and trades, they are not end in themselves. They are the means to achieve certain social goals. We need trade and investment to pursue our social objectives like human dignity, standard of living, equality. And if they run parallel and they have conflicting objectives, then you may have money, you may raise the growth, but that growth will come at the cost of human dignity, inequality, lack of distribution, social justice, as well as environmental degradation. So I wanted to finish it briefly because time is limited. I feel that this is a multifaceted area, and we cannot have one size fits all approach and policy considerations. But inherent problems here is that traditionally investment regime is geared toward the protection of the investors. And here, if investment protection is the primary consideration of the investment regime or trade regime, then they must consider that how they then take into account in their operation their implications for human rights and environmental considerations. Second, developing country context, they like to attract business, they like to attract much needed foreign investment. As a result, sometimes they shy away, or often also they don't have the regulatory framework to make the multinational corporations or foreign investors accountable under their domestic regulatory framework or institutional framework. Often because of the poor governance system, because of the poor institutional framework, often we don't see any tangible enforcement if there are violations of human rights and if there are destruction of the environmental the resources in the developing country context. So I think this is one thing. Second area is also the technology transfer, and also that how we can see some of these are actually even beyond the capacity of individual states. It comes from much needed the international and regional regulatory framework.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Alam. You've highlighted quite a number of issues and challenges, and I think what you were mentioning about capacities also of developing countries, the regulatory framework, but also the fact that trade and investment is not a goal in itself, but it's actually to contribute to inclusive and sustainable development. I think these are a number of important messages, and I hope we will have a second round for you for questions, looking at what is then needed in terms of the kind of regulatory framework, governance framework that you were referring to actually make that happen, to make that link between trade and investment and sustainable and inclusive development. that provides the opportunities also for social upgrading. I think that is very much what we are talking about here. So we have also with us Mr. Tamim Ahmed, Research Associate in the Center for Policy Dialogue. He's participating from the panel in Dhaka. So the same question for you. You've also been doing research. And I was also wondering, you know, what your research has uncovered on ways in which trade and investment can be harnessed to achieve respect for human rights in business operations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. We all know that Bangladesh has seen, a steeper increase in the trade and investment over the recent years. If I want to give it in exact numbers, in last 10 years, the investment in Bangladesh increased by 13% on average, and the FDI has increased by 26% on average. And the export compared to 2010 is now 46% higher almost. So that shows that the trades and increasing, and with that, if you see the disaggregate distribution of FDI, you would see the most of this investment in recent time mostly come into made into power sector and ICT sector. But however, along with that, some investment in some labor intensive sector as well, like food processing and transportation, you'd see a lot of investment has been taking place. So to say that is that, you know, with the increase of investment, as these are the labor intensive sector, so the increase of risks of human rights violation is also been in increase. So if I want to give you a in specific number, if we consider one indicator, for example, you would see in last 6 years, Bangladesh has seen on average 262 industrial accidents in every year. So that shows that although the investment is increasing, but perhaps the human rights, the violation of human rights perhaps is also an increase. So trade and investment definitely are very important, particularly for Bangladesh, because, you know, it creates employment. And it is one of the very first step of decent employment. It creates employability. From that point, it's very important. However, if it takes place without adequate regulatory framework or enforcement of law, we can see the major other components of decent work might remain uncertain. So, from that point of view, I would like to tell that for example, decent wage, which is another key component of decent work, as mentioned by ILO, is in very much in I would say in limited stage in Bangladesh now, because you see it's in the RMD industry, or like many other exporting industry, it's the international buyers who set the price for those products, and they the price they offer is very difficult for the suppliers that they send to offer a decent wage to their workers. So it's very difficult for them. On the other hand, in the domestic industries, it's very difficult for them to set their wage. Although Bangladesh minimum wage board has set minimum wage for 42 sectors, but it is not sufficient, because it's not for all that. The minimum wage is not set for all the sectors, and secondly, the wage that has been set as minimum is not necessarily the standard living wage. So it's very difficult for the workers to ensure to have the basic human rights with that minimum amount of wage. On the other hand, occupational safety has been remaining as a very big concern, as I mentioned earlier, in Bangladesh as well. Like with in particularly in the non-RMG industry, you would see that in the RMG industry, the most of the improvement that has been taken place over the years in terms of occupational safety and health, it's because of the effective pressure of the brand on their suppliers, and they are capable of providing that pressure on the suppliers. However, although if you want to pursue the same methodology on the other sector, it's very difficult, because in Though in other export-oriented industries, the buyers are not from tier 1 as it is in RMG industry. So those buyer of this industry is not very capable enough to really put pressure on their suppliers to ensure improvement in occupational safety and health. Therefore, a big gap remains in that as well. Now, if I talk about the recent incident of Hashim Foods, you would see it has also revealed that child labor has also been a very pervasive in Bangladesh as well. Although we do not have the very latest data, but BBS has been conducting a recent survey lately. But it can be very indicative that after the COVID, it might have deteriorated further. And the most, I would say, the most one of the weakest area in terms of decent work, decent employment in Bangladesh is been in the area of social dialogue. You'd see social dialogue has been not taking place in the law, although there is mention of safety committee and there is worker participation committee, but in reality, they are not as effective as they should be. So as a result, you see a lot of violence are being taken place even in the RMG industry, where we are saying that these are the most compliant industry, and without social dialogue, it's very difficult for the industry to maintain a harmonized industry relation. Now, coming to the part of, if I come to the part of the role of the government, what the government can do in that regard, and occupational. If I speak about occupational safety, for example, Bangladesh government clearly has a limitation in terms of their human resource capacity, and of course the enforcement of law. And although BIDA has started a recent initiative of inspecting all the industry, but it has to be ensured that the inspection has been carried out for a long time, and the quality of inspection has to be evaluated on a regular basis as well. Now, if I continue speaking about the occupational safety, you would see for Bangladesh, the government has the limited capacity, but it doesn't have any exact regulatory framework for that as well. In that regard, UNGPs can play a really key role for Bangladesh. As I said, that Bangladesh doesn't have that capacity to really implement enforce the law in reality, or is not being enforced at the moment. So as is stipulated in the UNGPs, that business itself should respect the human rights, although if it is not covered by the national law or by the if the government is also not enforcing that. So from that point of view, the government will definitely, along with in attracting investment, they need to ensure that they are promoting UNGPs to have a responsible investment in Bangladesh. And also, I would see the level of investment is taking place. Bangladesh is not really having that kind of responsible investment, because we see that in recent time, a lot of investment has been made in subcontracting sector in RMG industry of Bangladesh, and you see there is a lot of orders right now, and there is a surge of export. But the media report showed that a lot of those new subcontracting factory are not following the guideline of all the data for their safety purpose. And also, I would like to conclude by saying two lines that you see the international stakeholders have a big role to play here. For example, we would say that the sourcing government where the brands are operating, they need to make them accountable in those countries, because in the end of the day, it's their responsibility as well to really make their supply chain accountable. And as it was been mentioned in earlier session, that they need to consider them as a partner. And you see in the previous, without considering them as the partner, and if without making them accountable, it will be very difficult to really have them, to have really promote investment in sustainable and in responsible way. So with that, I would like to conclude and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamin Ahmed, for highlighting the specific challenges in Bangladesh, I think, in relation to indeed attracting responsible investment that contribute to decent work, also highlighting some of the governance challenges in relation to the role of government in terms of putting in place the legislation, but not just the legislation, also the effective implementation of legislation through labor inspection and labor administration. And at the same time, highlighting the role of responsible business having the responsibility to respect human rights and labor rights in their operations, irrespective of whether also the government plays its role. So thank you very much for this contribution. I would like to move now to India, another very important country, of course, in South Asia. And there we have two representatives from India. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to Utkarsha Kodi Agarwal of Invest India, which of course is an investment promotion agency. And we were already talking about sustainable investment, responsible investment. So could you share with us, how Invest India, which is a very important investment promotion agency, how you are promoting, I would say, responsible business conduct among the foreign companies that actually come to India and as such try to have really these investments contribute to inclusive economic growth and decent work in India. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much. Well, as most of you might be aware that as an investment promotion agency, half the job is to facilitate and also to promote certain areas within India. Invest India does sensitize its foreign investors with an overall framework which is present in the country or at the same time. We do have a very strong legal system which protects the rights of the laborers as well as women. We have child labor laws, we have prevention of sexual harassment, and all these regulations which come through statutes and rules. We have tried our best to give the companies an overview and let them do their due diligence in order to invest in these accordingly invest in sectors. Now, one of the major steps we've taken through the single window system, Invest India has created an application form where we let the investors provide details as to which sector they want to come into and where they feel that they can provide some kind of economic growth. We give them the link to the exact state, as well as we've established state desks and connect the two, and then thereby giving some impetus to growth in that particular state to specific districts. And through several initiatives, we promote the Government of India policies and state government policies within our own teams. For example, one is the One District, One Product initiative. Invest India has spearheaded a lot of projects within that. The One District, One Product is basically identifying the niche products being produced in each district in India. And we try to promote these. We have helped build the linkage between investors and online platforms for these skilled laborers and workers, as well as handicraftsmen and women who would be showcasing their products and making them available for easy sale. And another thing was of geographical indication, which was the turmeric, one of the Lakadong turmeric of Meghalaya, which is the highest in curcumin content in the world. Now, this was the One District, One Product, but we collaborated within another initiative in Invest India, which was called the Agni Mission, a Government of India initiative, where we promoted an Indian technology company, which was manufacturing drones. But with those drones, we helped the farmers at Lakadong to lift the turmeric out of there because they were in very remote areas where roads were not accessible. thereby helping them and providing them with a solution. While this was at a pilot stage, we definitely feature to the world that yes, for investment and socio-economic growth can be clubbed together. The nexus can be drawn together. So among other things, of course, we do also look at initiatives such as Sahyog, which is literally translates into help and assistance. That is our CSR initiative, where we connect the investors to our CSR network, where they can go and use their money and put it towards social impact initiatives such as recycling of paper and converting that paper into notebooks, which are to be given to underprivileged children and to orphanages. We have also done enough material and publishing of reports at the local level and collaborated with the Department of Justice here to make ease and access to justice available to an investor as well as those who work there. As an advisory or a facilitator, we can definitely suggest that compliances have to be followed. One of the main things an investor has to do is, in addition to complying with the regulations of the country, is also to include that in their structure. So bringing in labor compliances within the compliance policies of the company, we encourage our investors to do that. And one of the most successful sort of collaborations was actually during the hardest times, which was during the pandemic. We reached out to our investors who ended up helping in setting up the hospitals, oxygen plants, and even creating helplines for the local people over here. In addition to that, we also apprise our investors of incentive schemes already available at the state level, where there are certain mandatory or sometimes just incentivized versions of hiring local youth in districts and areas, or even sector-wise, there's plenty in the information technology field. So connecting the investor to what is the need of the nation and thereby also creating a profitable avenue for them. We help facilitate that portion. I hope I've not used up my time. I was trying to be.
No, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Utkarsha, highlighting many different ways in which Invest India is actually promoting, as you called it, connecting the investor with national priorities. I think that is actually a very key message, what we are talking about. And you've given a number of, of course, compliance with national legislation. I think that is a key element. But you also gave some examples about incentives for hiring local youth, skills development, which of course are very important elements in contributing to national development priorities. So we will stay in India with the next panelist, Mr. Unikrishnan, from, I should say, the former president of the Employers Federation of India and former chairman of the National Committee on Industrial Relations. And of course, as a representative of an employer organization, at the one hand, you have, of course, regulations, I think specifically also in India, promoting responsible business. And at the other hand, you have also this inclusion of upholding human rights, labor rights in trade and investment agreements. So what do you do as an employers organization to support your member companies in upholding these standards so that they are well positioned to take advantage of these trade and investment opportunities? The floor is yours. Sorry, you are still muted. You have to unmute yourself.
I got muted. Sorry, I didn't remember. Sorry. Thanks, Geeta, for this opportunity to be representing the employer side from the largest democracy of the world. The conflict which Professor Shaukat has very clearly alluded to, and Utkarsha explained as to where are we currently. I'll try to give what we did and what we continue to be doing. But before I starting on, I need to make one clarification that the Employers Federation of India, the CIS, National Committee on Industrial Relations, which I chaired for a fairly long period and worked very closely with the government. We represent the larger sizes of industry, which is around say 8,000 numbers in India, and a lot of MSMEs. But it will not include the agriculture sector, which employs the maximum number of people in India. And second is maybe homemaids, drivers, equivalent of that. Though we have of late been able to the e-platform delivery boys equivalent, their associations are also being managed by our association. So I would say that I do represent maybe half of Indians who are employed. Let's say that as an employer. The other half, whatever is negatives about that, I may not be able to talk positives about. Of course, you are aware of that also. So coming to this, right from the time when the United Nations guiding principles have come out, Government of India had been 2011 onwards very active in ensuring that local regulations are going to be created. National Action Plan was created, and we had declared by 2020 we will have our policy on human rights related to business being declared. And the zero draft was also created by the government before the pandemic got done. In 2000, in fact, 18 it got done. In 2019, of course, we have also created, I think, our national guidelines on responsible businesses. Another part of that, we were working very closely with the government, and its stipulations coming from them that the top 100 listed companies of India will have to annually declare more than the annual report, the business responsibility report of the BRR had to be done. And seeing the success, to make that a success, we struggled, because convincing our members that, this is a part of your responsibility. Normally, they used to declaring an annual report, which would be 200 pages, all financial numbers. But convincing their entire entreaty of our people that, look, this is not enough. That is only financial numbers, only one part of it. And I'm very happy to say that in exactly with the government support, we were able to get it organized in 24-month period. All the 100 of them reported. So the government became very ambitious, and they told, okay, now let it be made to 500 numbers. And happy to report back to you that the top 500 listed companies of the country do report BRR, which is a replica of the 3 pillars of the UNGC related to, your, what you talk about, protecting, respecting, remedifying, and also other thing which is becoming very, very important is for all the larger companies and listed companies. Listed companies in India are approximately 5,500. It is now mandatory, becoming mandatory, that you're going to be reporting in integrated reporting. The integrated reporting is aligned with the SDGs. So it is a combination of this and a lot more of, I would say, proliferation of information across the country, state-wise, region-wise, even local, district-wise, you've been able to manage in talking about the importance of ESG, because all encompassing everything is ESG in that one. And you could see that, I'm going to see the reflection of that in numbers. India is just about going to be exceeding $400 billion in export. For a $3 trillion economy, we are talking about maybe how much, 13-14% is the export right now. And mind you, our the manufacturing GDP is only 28%, including construction. So when you export 400, agriculture produce export is a traded item coming into that. So the countries where we are exporting, a predominant part of them are the developed world. And in all the trade agreements, as you alluded in the beginning, we need to be having this, even if it is not there in the bilateral agreements or FTAs, free trade agreements that we sign. A multinational based in North America or Germany or maybe UK or maybe Netherlands or maybe Switzerland will not buy that produce of India, whether an agricultural produce or whether it is going to be in any other item. They do have inspections done. So it goes to a level where compliance has improved a lot more in the last maybe 8 to 10 year period of time. I need to say that. And it is working together with the government. We have difficulties in implementation and representing. And I need to say that we have a very tough government now. And they don't tolerate anything of that kind, because of which things are improving substantially on that count. So that's on the overall take. In my opinion, the next move that we're doing is that we had 44 plus different labor laws in the country. archaic, some of them inherited from the British era. The earliest one would be about 1920s. Law is still prevailing and we are following. We have been able to work so closely with the government that we are subsuming all of them into 4 to make it simple, easy. Because otherwise, see, an organization has got a legal muscle power to go to the court. A poor worker doesn't have that ability. So unless you simplify it. So a lot is being done in that. I would say that 3.5 years of work with the government of India, the Ministry of Labor and Entrepreneurship, MOL, we have been working, and it is already passed by the Parliament of India. If not for the COVID, it would have been implemented by this time. And I'm looking forward to that getting happening. In that, some of the issues that is alluded by Shaukat and his colleague from another professor from Bangladesh, similar problems are there in India also. I mean, we are brothers in arms. I mean, it's virtually a part, the culture is almost the same. So many of them are getting addressed in that one. There is the minimum wages code, which will be all encompassing. And many of the social security, because first and foremost, one thing that we come as a country is we are at the cusp of a development. A part of India is developed, other part is yet to be developed. When I talk about it's not, I'm talking about economic development, not zone-wise or state-wise development. So a social security is a must at this juncture. If you do not incorporate, the gap between the rich and the poor will happen. So we had been working so closely and willingly agreeing to the government that we can be a forebearer for it. So I want to say that the organized industry in India is fairly advanced now in terms of most of the human rights related area. But that doesn't remove us from the responsibility that still we have n number of wrong things happening in the country. And in some of them, it is large in numbers. And we have the willpower, but I don't think exactly which the professors have alluded to in terms of you need investment, you need job creation to take care of the basic need of food, shelter, and clothing. That unless we are able to provide, this exploitation will continue. The faster we develop our economy and the government has got sufficient funds availability to support this minimum requirement, then enforcement of some of these human rights will really happen. The larger industry can be forced to do because you have a control over them. Smaller ones are not so easily controllable. So that is my overall take. But let me say that I'm very happy because I've been very actively involved with this entire activity from 2010. Now I'm also a professor. I'm now managing a research institute, moved away from the corporate world. But again, very openly say 10 years that I had worked very closely in both these positions. A lot has happened, not because of me I'm talking about, governments and maybe the corporation. Unless this is my take on the human rights will be protected when there is wealth sufficiently available, which can be distributed, may not be as evenly as possible, but at least to a certain extent, there should be sufficient resources available to take care of the basic needs of human beings, then exploitation can be absolutely controlled. That's where we are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uni. I think, again, you've covered a lot of different items and issues, but I think I really like the fact how you were talking about, how responsible business, of course, is incentivized by government initiatives, but at the same time, it provides a lot of opportunities for business to then fully be integrated into the global economy. You were, of course, talking also about requirements from the government on this reporting, integrated reporting, ESG reporting, but at the same time, it is putting Indian companies in a very good position to then benefit from the exports you were talking about, thus stimulating job creation in India. And I think the collaboration with the government you were referring to, including on social protection, social security, to make sure that all of the vulnerable groups really have the basic needs covered, are of course very, very important elements to move forward. So thank you very much for your contribution to this important discussion. And now we are moving actually to the workers' perspective, again with a panelist in the session in Dhaka. We have Mr. Rashidul Alam Raju, Secretary General of Industrial Bangladesh Council, with us. So in your view, of course, from a worker's perspective, what are some of the key actions that both home and host countries of multinational enterprises should undertake to protect workers' rights and to promote really the observance of these international standards in the context of trade and investment, including in supply chains. So, Mr. Alam Raju, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, already the speaker said the situation of in South Asia almost same. So actually, the main issue in South Asia workers are low wages jobs with no social protection. South Asian workers, especially women workers, face precarious employment in the informal sector, ensure livelihood and seek skills, lack of skills, sorry. There are also challenges like illiteracy in education, nutrition, health and employment, including poverty, unbalanced development, political instability, slow economic growth, illiteracy, malnutrition, and widespread gender violation. However, there are also the worker rights violation issues in South Asia. Like workers are not getting their salary or wages on time and leaves, extra working hour, harassment and abuse, obstruction of the form trade union, and bust the trade union. Therefore, I comment that the home government should ensure the proper implementation of the local laws, rules, and policies to ensure worker rights, including fair wages. Respect to the ILO Convention 87 and 98, including International Labour Standard, and ensure the laws and regulations are consistent. The government should work on the strengthening the labor standard. To ensure the proper enforcement, the government should work on the strengthening the labor department, like Department of Labor or inspection of DIFE, which is called DIFE. And there should be system in place to ensure the transparency and accountability to those organizations. The government should work on developing the mechanism to take necessary action against the labor rights violation and to facilitate smooth and quick process to resolve any issues. The government should work on the policy to provide guidance to the enterprise to guide them to ensure rights and dignity of the workers and make them accountable to follow the laws and regulations. The government can work on promoting multi-stakeholder forum to promote and ensure social dialogue in the sectoral and factory level on issues related to workers' rights between workers and owners in factories. And the host government should work on the policies and guidance for the companies to look at workers' rights and labor standard in sending countries and make them accountable to ensure and practice ethical business. For example, what price the companies are giving to the supplier and what price they are taking from the customers. Workers should get the fair wages based on price of the production. The host government should develop a policy and regulations to make the company accountable to ensure the ILO Convention 87 and 98 and work on the establishing environment for ensuring social dialogue in the sending countries. To translate and publish the corporate policies into local language. So I think this kinds of initiative can resolve or hopefully reduce the workers' rights violation and as well as the human rights violation all over the South Asia as well as the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alam Raju. Clearly, I would say, formulating expectations from the trade unions on what both home and host governments should do to better protect labor rights in business operations, specifically also the observance of industrial relations and Conventions 87 and 98 of the ILO, which we know is a remaining challenge in many countries in South Asia, but also, of course, highlighting challenges in relation to skills development, the informal economy, informality, high rates of informality, where we know there are the highest violations of human rights and labor rights are happening in the informal economy, lack of social protection, and so on. So we have quite an agenda carved out in terms of expectations also on governments, what they should be doing to improve the governance framework. And of course, the importance of social dialogue in that regard, engagement both with employers' organizations and with trade unions. So we have a bit of time left for a second round for engagement with our panelists. But first of all, I would also like to see whether there would be any questions from the floor that you see in the room, which I unfortunately cannot see from my screen. So over to you to see whether there are any questions from the room before I go back to our panelists for a second round.
Thank you, Geeta. I see there are no questions as of now, so maybe we can go for a very quick second round, considering we have a little over 10 minutes left.
Yes, so I will be very creative with the second round, because of course we don't have time to, for a second round of questions. So I think what I will ask all of our panelists is actually, first of all, give them a possibility to react to some of the items that have been put forward by the panelists in the first round. And at the same time, give us a concluding remark, give us about, looking to the future, what is really needed to better link the trade and investment agenda with the better respect of human rights and labor rights. So I will start again with Professor Shaukat Alam. So please go ahead. Sorry, you're still muted. Yes,
thank you,
please go ahead.
Reflecting on all the points mentioned by previous speakers, I can see a couple of common trends here. As Mr. Uni mentioned, in South Asia context, this is a similar sort of landscape you can expect. The trend is we have serious issues with compliance. We are also with some of those issues are essentially linked with our low socioeconomic development, or I would say rather it's stemming from poverty, lack of skills, and also I feel that it's also a competition, the concern that whether the businesses will be competitive if they want to take into account the human rights aspects and who will pay for it, basically. Integrating environmental issues and human rights issues in the business is good, but whether this business will be competitive at the end of the day. This is a big challenge here. However, if I can see that, again, Mr. Uni mentioned, and I'm familiar with this trend as well, although these are all voluntary now, these sort of standards and guidelines, and particularly in the form of SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary standards or technical barriers to trade. So it is whether it's environmental standards, it's labor standards, equality. These are very much now embedded in the expectation of the global market. So that dimension, that if we want to be competitive and make it more sustainable businesses, we need to find the ways to how we actually incorporate these global standards in our supply chain. Otherwise, the buyers, in the OECD countries and consumers in the OECD countries will look at, okay, whether it's what is its the emission, is it 5-star rating in terms of energy consumption? These are the stuff in the product. So we need to adhere to those standards. And last point, I would like to mention that it is not possible alone by the government to implement or incorporate. By its very nature, it is multi-stakeholder. There is a need for public and private partnership here. And also we need to raise the awareness of the consumers domestically, as well as the business. And you may talk about some of the compliances that are happening in the formal sectors in Bangladesh, in the others. They were talking about their good compliance in the garment sector. But we are talking about 1 or 2 sectors, but largely informal sectors are untouched. They have no idea about what you mean by human rights, what human rights and which human rights, and when their fundamentals are not met, the human rights and environmental issues are a luxury to them. So it's very much a part of, we need to look at it as we need to have a staggered approach. And we need to think about how we can address it gradually, taking into account the ground level situations. It's not same as, this is the reality. We cannot expect the way we apply human rights and environmental standards in the developed world. We cannot apply the same way. We cannot appreciate the same way as it comes to developing countries, more specifically the global South and South Asia in this particular instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaukat, for sharing these. I think that the business case for responsible business, I think, is clearly there. You were talking about competitiveness of businesses, being part of these global supply chains where clear expectations are there. There are limitations maybe in developing countries, but the global economy, there are actually these expectations of upholding these international standards, but that this is not for businesses alone or for government alone, but really requires collective action and addressing a number of systemic issues. And I think there the informal economy you were referring to, of course, is a very important priority in moving forward. So I will now give the floor to Urkarsha, for your closing remarks and observations in relation to other interventions. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Geeta. I think I'm just going to supplement what Professor Alam was reiterating in terms of compliance, and it's not enough to just have it in regulatory framework. And as Professor Unikrishnan also pointed out, in a recent event, a government made it mandatory to an extent. In fact, effective this financial year, our securities agency, which is known as SEBI, has made it mandatory for the first 1,000 plus listed entities to give a compliance report. However, after hearing all the insightful things said at the ground level, that where the labor is really struggling, I think it's not just enough to have a compliance structure. What's important is to communicate this compliance structure to your labor, as well as providing an internal redressal mechanism. It's not the job of courts to provide justice. Justice is a point which is, it's really an attitude. It's a mental, it's a mindset. And when we bring in that mindset through investment, through business, in everybody, like in terms of fairness, I think we can most definitely implement it in a better fashion. And it's possible because what started off, I mean, the biggest example would be sexual harassment, according to me, that what led from the UN International Convention, which was ratified, it came up as a Supreme Court judgment in India, which were called the Vishaka Guidelines, led to a statute, and that today is a mandatory feature for compliance and redressal in companies in India and other organizations, not just restricted to companies. So I would say that most certainly when we see the trickle-down effect of what we can as global citizens, first and foremost, see ourselves as global citizens to sort of amalgamate not just cultures, but our thought processes of ethics and what we want in terms of fair trade, what we want to give from, the top to bottom approach. Everybody should actually benefit from the investment. Everybody should actually benefit from the measures taken. So I think I definitely in sentiment agree with what has been shared by all the esteemed panelists over here. And it is possible if we, have more brainstorming sessions, I suppose, and everyone can sort of come together and help one another in this manner. That's it. I think I'd conclude with that without taking up more of your time.
Thank you very much, Utkarsha, for your insights, and especially indicating that regulation is important, but it is not enough. You really need to have a change in the mindset, also among enterprises. So there's a need for change in this mindset of doing the right thing, so that everyone basically can benefit from the opportunities that trade and investment bring. And I think that's a nice way also to move to Mr. Uni. So what do you think is needed for businesses, to also come to this change in approach, to really see their role in society as contributing to advancement of people and planet? Over to you.
Very quickly, Geeta, before Mr. Uni starts, this is our last question for the day, because we would have a little over 3 or 4 minutes left. So I would head back to Mr. Uni now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will be very quick on that. In my opinion, education is one which is going to be making the major difference for the entire Asian continent. That if people are educated, they will know what is the human right of his right or his or hers also, and what is someone else's. It's equal to what I have is somebody else's right. So violation and exploitation can be avoided. So this is a major requirement to educate our entire people. Then major achievement could have happened. Why people are able to exploit is because of corruption, which is prevalent in the entire of Asia. I'm not taking any nation for that factor. E-governance is a solution for it to substantially reduce it, so that there is no need for you to be going to a babu. In our language, in all area, babu means a bureaucrat. So avoidance of bureaucracy. These are the 2 things. A lot of that is achieved in India. Our ease of doing business is improved by almost 53 points. From 130, we came down to 77 or so in a period of maybe, I would say, less than a decade, when we took a conscious effort of e-governance. Education is yet to be happening. In my opinion, education is not just reading and writing. It is awareness about, that is elevating the mind. That level of an education is needed. If you do both of this, I don't think there will not be any need for anybody to be, and nobody will take nonsense from somebody. Labor or anybody will not take it if he's aware of what his rights are. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uni, for this very insightful, on the need for education, know about your rights so that you effectively can exercise your rights. I think that is a very important key message as well, that I'm sure the trade unions will also agree with. And just with that, I'm handing over to the panel in Dhaka for maybe a quick closing word from the 2 panelists there. Before, I would like to really hard, from the bottom of my heart, thank all of the panelists for this stimulating exchange on harnessing trade and investment for responsible business and sustainable development. So I hand over to the panelists in Dhaka for the 2 closing words, if you have them. Please, over to you.
Thank you. So I just want to add a few things. I think all of the things that I was to say is already have been mentioned there. we are talking about ensuring enforcement of laws, but at the same time, I think we need to think about the other ways, which is motivating the entrepreneurs. I'm setting examples. The government has a duty not only to implement laws, but also to guide the enterprises, particularly those who are in small and informal sectors, to how they can conduct their business even after complying all the human rights regulations. And it's also a principles of it's also embedded in the principles of UNGP that they has to have the highest priority of regarding human rights, and they have to say examples of how they can do it. And it's not only about punishing them, because there is always a hide and seek game. The workers association are saying that this compliance are not being followed, and the enterprises are saying is being followed. So it's a reality that I think that there can be a violation of human rights, but from the government side, I think there should be a gradual effort that how they can come and sit together and discuss where the gaps are, instead of just going for rigorous punishment in the laws, and also promote some of the good examples that are existed within the country. I'm sure there are, and make them give them the idea that okay, it is beneficial if you want to do business and be compliant at the same time. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Raju bhai. Last words.
Hello. Thank you. And thank you, ILO, for giving me for the opportunity to speak in this event. And actually, I just want to share that the Industrial Global Union already working for the worker rights all over the world, and of course, his affiliates like Industrial Bangladesh Council or the other country are working with the for the worker rights through the GFA or Global Framework Agreement, and also the working with the government different committee like worker labor law reforms committee and others committee. So, and hopefully that the worker rights will be ensured, but we have to fight against the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raju bhai. So with this, we are actually at the end of our session and literally right in time. So thank you so much to all the panelists. I know this requires a lot of deliberation and a lot of discussion, and we must have us to, be so succinct and specifically give out our opinion. Thank you so much, Geeta, for doing this so wonderfully. Although you're doing it virtually, it never felt so. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being so patient and listening to us for all day. With this, we conclude, and we will shortly be starting our closing ceremony. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.